Hello and welcome to the podcast from Duendelvin. I am Corbin, and in this podcast we will be exploring the world of Savarion. Here we have Jeff and Kyle, and in today's episode we will be discussing the Horiki. So to start off, last episode you briefly touched down on what the Horiki were and their role, and a few major ones popped up, but we didn't delve in. Do you want to elaborate further?
Yes, we can do that. So in the year 491 of the Second Age, so we actually have
A timeline.
like a timeline from the start of the Second Age is when the Keepers were established, and then in the year 805 was when they created the Shambari. We talked about them and how they were ultimately a failure. And then in the year 928, they actually created the first Horiki, Nargoth. Now, Nargoth had the ability, they gave him the ability to create more Horiki, but the Keepers only actually created Nargoth. They didn't create the other ones. And so he was the first and the strongest of them. So
Struggle was full on beast mode, but I know he knew he couldn't do it on his own, and through council with the keepers, he decided to make his original four sons. He had Thernic, Ilios, Keteline, and Zaok. We talked a little bit about them, kind of touching on who they were, and the fact that they're a little bit of dirtbags. But yeah, honestly, that's kind of the core of what it is, and then eventually Nargath started creating more Horiki to support them, but they were all given access to one ability, whereas the four first sons were given access like Nargath had at a step lower than what he was able to do.
You said the four sons had a purpose, and were the four sons the only notable ones, or were there any other notable Horiki?
The four sons were definitely the more notable ones. That's why they have names that we recognize through history. Plus, they kind of designed it that way in their own shenanigans, which we get into, which is really exciting about. Yeah, no, other than that, the Horiki the other ones that were created were given access to one specific mastery of essence, whereas the four sons had access to all essence trees and were able to utilize them freely, successfully, aggressively, and terrifyingly. Mm-hmm.
What did each of the sons represent, just to refresh?
So Thernic was created to represent peace, and then you have Ilios, who was created for mercy, and then Keteline for justice, and Zaok for order. And the idea, because Savarion is designed, it's supposed to be about balance. And so Nargoth created the four of them to create an internal balance system. So,
All right.
does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
How did they operate? Like, was there a means to get to that, or were they just strictly what they were?
Can you rephrase the question? I'm not quite sure I understand.
How did they conduct their purpose?
Oh, okay. So how do they see their purpose being
How did
played
they
out?
see their purpose, and how did they follow through to get to that purpose?
Okay.
Because, as you said last episode, everything in the world of Savarion has a core purpose.
Okay. So the easiest way to think about it is if you imagine that the moral hierarchy of Savarion is your purpose, right? So your purpose is the highest moral standard in the world of Savarion with everything, right? And so if Thernic was created with the purpose of peace, that would supersede any other morality issue. So if somebody needed to die, somebody needed to be imprisoned, somebody needed to be elevated or demoted, or skirmish needed to be allowed to happen so that those people could die off, or they needed to step in and separate it, whatever was the most effective means towards peace, would be the right answer. Whereas when you look at Zayok, it would be more geared towards order than peace, right? And a lot of times order and peace commingle really well, but not necessarily, right? So sometimes when you think peace is more of like your serene moment, whereas order is like the right way of things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be an order, but not necessarily peace, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's how they would attempt to accomplish their purpose.
So they wouldn't care about how they got there. They just care that they did get there.
The ends will always justify the means to the Horiki. They were created for that purpose. So, in the same case, if you have conflict here, because we do have some opposing ideas and some opposing options, peace does not always denote mercy. And if mercy needs to happen, that's why you had Nargoth, who came in, and he would be the mediator between his own sons and determining what needed to happen there. And so that's where he was utilizing his sons as a tool to be able to do the work effectively, because you had 9 races in a massive world. Nargoth can't be everywhere at once. So he made the sons to help with that. And then most of the time he adhered to their judgment, but every now and again, obviously, something needed to happen or they had conflict and the 2 sons saw something differently. So Nargoth mediated. He had a different viewpoint that was able to take in more because his purpose was keep everything smooth.
Okay. Were the Horiki still around when the second big war happened? Because you talked about a war happening like 200 years after the Keepers of the Peace fell. Were they a part of it? Did they die off?
So I feel like we're getting the timeline mixed up just a little bit. But yes, they were around. Some of them were around for the next war.
It's strange because they weren't just around. They were kind of the cause of it. They were we saved the Horiki for this episode because we wanted to establish who the Keepers were, and then understanding that the Horiki are the reason that the Keepers fell. They orchestrated the demise of the Keepers, and then they orchestrated the 9 races into conflict that would allow them to effectively eliminate the majority of the 9 races, with the ultimate goal of snatching up their kids and then making themselves gods. Like they was in there to snatch up them kiddos and be like, if you're under 2, we can take you away from this, and then we're going to teach you that we're the gods of the world. So that there's some steps that happen between point A to point D, which was effectively the death of Nargoth led to these weird happenstances where Theranik was suddenly like, you know what? Forget these mortal idiots. I'm better than this.
So Theranik orchestrated the death of the Keepers of the Peace,
Effectively,
and
yes.
then Nargoth, and then
Nargoth died first.
So let's go with the timeline of the series of events, right? So the Horiki are created in 928, and then Nargoth creates the rest of them that year or the following year. In the year 1254 of the Second Age is the end of the 1,000-year war, and that ends the Second Age and starts the Third Age. And so for a little over a 1,300-year span, most of what happened in our history at that point was little skirmishes and stuff, but for the most part, there was peace in the world. And so Theranik never stepped out of the confines of his original creation until Nargoth was killed. In the year 883 of the Third Age, Nargoth is killed in one of the skirmishes that happens between. And a lot of times,
mortal races?
I'm sorry?
By one of the mortal races?
Yes, which we'll get into that. Should we cover that? How that happened?
I think we have to kind of touch on that a little bit, because this is not an easy feat. That we're talking about a semi-godlike being gets offed, removed, deleted by some lowly mortals who shouldn't be able to do that in the first place. That's why it was a huge shock.
So there's an organization that, again, we'll talk about more in depth in another episode. We only have so much time to talk about each thing. But this organization actually had the capability to understand how to utilize magic and weapons, right? Which was invented by the dwarves originally, but this organization used it to create a weapon that could kill the Horiki. And so they did, and they used it to kill Nargoth. And that set things in motion for the rest of the timeline in the Third Age, which after Nargoth dies, because he was replenishing their ranks as they died, because a couple of them would die helping out with skirmishes and stuff like that. So when Nargoth died, Theranik went to the Keepers and said, hey, can I have the ability that my father had so that I can replenish our ranks? And the Keeper said no. That's what caused the shift in Theranik's head to go from my job is this to I want to be in charge, right? And so
I mean, in all fairness, he'd been keeping peace for over 100 years. Like, he had been actively mitigating and watching the mortals come and go. Some of them would have died of natural causes under his charge, but he would just watch them continue to make the same mistakes, and he would have to come in and do the same things over and over again. And for a long time, Theranik was like, yeah, this is my job, I can do this. And then, yeah, when looking at the same mortals who made him are also of the same ilk, just older, of the people that he's been policing, and they're telling him, nah, dog, you don't get to be a thing anymore, your people are just going to phase out naturally. Yeah, I can understand that shift a little bit, right?
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that after, we have a couple hundred, or a little over 120 years that Theranik was doing that. And then he devises a plan to become a god, right? And so right now, they aren't considered gods, they're considered constructs. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they're very, very, very powerful beings. However, they're not in charge. They're more police than they are leadership. Okay, and so Theranik finally says, okay, this is what needs to happen. I'm going to be in charge. We're going to be in charge. We're going to be the gods, and we're going to kill everybody except those who are under the age of 2. We're going to steal them, take them to the overworld, teach them that we are the gods, because now we control the narrative, and then let everybody else kill themselves. So that was the plan that was put in motion by Theranik. And so in 1589, so in 1504, Theranik is like, this is what we're going to do. And he talks to the other 3. This is the plan. In 1589, Zayok actually goes to the temple and destroys the temple of the Keepers, and he thinks everybody inside, but Aiel and Duendelvin escape, but he effectively destroys the Keepers of the Peace, and then they ensue what becomes another world war, and everybody dies this time.
Would that include Aiel and Duendelvin, or like did they just luck out, not die, or did they go somewhere?
So Duendelvin whisked away to the overworld. She was recognizing, like, we haven't really talked about this, but she was still in the process of mastering the skill sets of going back in time and viewing, not going back in time, but viewing through time through the eyes of somebody and then writing and scribing. So that's kind of what kept her away from things. She would oftentimes go and retreat and be secluded where it wasn't dangerous, because going and just effectively being in a trance for days on end is a terrible thing to do in this world. This world is not a safe place. It's not at all. And she would spend her time in a study in the overworld, effectively, so that she wasn't there when Zayok came, like she was supposed to be, but she got caught in the throes of another vision, is the best way to put it, a history vision, and so she didn't actually come back to the tower. Ayala is full of dirty tricks. Absolute snaky dirtbag. And he was like, this is goofy, I'm out. And he full on dipped.
Okay, so he just ran?
Straight up, he's really good at that.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I mean,
so, where did the Horiki take these children to teach them?
So the overworld is where they would have taken them.
What
But
happens in the overworld? Like, what is it?
so that's something we can definitely dig into. But the overworld is effectively Sky Islands, and there's two races, sorry, that originally inhabited the overworld. It was the sprites and the Coriatii. Coriatii and the sprites kind of just existed up there. The Coriatii are jailers. They're there to ensure that anything from the underworld doesn't come into the middle plane, to the world of Savarion. And so they just watch. They don't give a crap about what mortals do. They're like, look at these goofy goobers. Whatever, man. And then they have the sprites, who are insanely strong, but they're more like a big ant colony. So you want to think of them like they just build. So they're being given a task, and that task, they have these wonderful, cool floating islands in there, and needing a task to do, they effectively connected these floating islands with bridges and like built walkways and built palaces and just practiced their craft in the overworld. So they have this massive, wonderful lands that were these extravagant buildings that the sprites were just doing, and then tearing down and building again, and tearing down and building again. So the Horiki were like, "Oh, this is a neat place. This one's ours. Stop doing that. Build it like this." And the sprites were like, "Okay."
There are races in the overworld, and you talk about the underworld. Are there specific races in the underworld?
Yes. So there's two races of the overworld, two races of the underworld. Before the Shimbari were punished and put down there. But the two races of the underworld are the Comitai and the Immortuum. And so the Immortuum are essentially negative energy beings. And so they're immensely powerful. But if I were to try to heal one of them, that would cause them pain. But if I threw a fireball at them, it would make them feel better. So they're negative energy beings, if that makes sense. And they lived in, like, the underworld has dark places and light places, where there is light and there is dark. And the Immortuum would live in the dark areas, and they would farm and cultivate and live, like any other race. But they're very negative energy, so their day would be our night. And then the Comitai, there's 4 of them, and we'll
Like 4 total?
Yes.
4 total.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's only ever 4 of them.
For the Coriatii and for the Comitai. They're matched evenly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're your divine dark creatures. So where we get your dark mage powers and your manipulation powers and the Shadow Sentinel powers all come from there. Eventually, the youngest of them creates the Port of Lost Souls, which traps souls and uses that energy as a battery to power other things. But those 2 beings live in the underworld, and the Comitai would live in the light areas, whereas the Immortuum lived in the dark areas. So they lived apart from each other, not really interacting the way that the races of the mortal realm and the overworld lived together with each other. In the underworld, they would live separately.
So is the underworld like small, or is it just really empty?
Empty's the better rate for it. Yeah, it's vast and empty in its darkness.
Okay.
And its light areas. It's also home to very unique flora and fauna. It's got its own ecosystem, kind of the same way that the overworld does. They each have their own unique thing. It's just the sprites need purpose, because part of their purpose originally, the sprites built the great cities, the capital cities that the 9 races called home.
Okay. And then back to the Horiki. They enticed war.
Oh, yeah.
So was there a victor and then they came and wiped them out, or did they actually just kill themselves?
Oh, man. Okay, so first off, I kind of want to get into this because it's kind of fun. They spent a long time manipulating the mortal races, maneuvering people into power, engaging in secret functions that forced sane people to go insane, and really riled up the 9 races against each other. And they did it by suggesting that you could take the power of those scrolls we talked about, or the runes, those that each race got from the keepers, to try and be a deterrent against other races. The Horiki put it out there and said, hey, if you kill everybody and take that power is now yours. You could be the strongest.
Can you actually do that?
Absolutely. It's showcased in the board game. If you were if you kill the last standing member of a race, you gain that racial power.
Oh, okay.
So they used that as kind of an incentive for some of the races. Some of them they just made sure that the individual that got in power was younger or less experienced. Some of them they had more aggressive tendencies. Sometimes they were successful and sometimes they weren't. Some like the dwarves were just kind of immune to their shenanigans. They had one purpose and that was Tinkertown. They just wanted to construct and build new things. They didn't care. So no matter what the Horiki did to the dwarves, they were kind of like, we'll take that into advisement. Thanks, guys. And it ended up being their downfall. They turtled up and it didn't turn out well for them.
So once the races were like completely wiped out, they bring the children down. So was the world of Savarion inhabited by babies?
Kind of. So they were raised in the overworld, in the safety of the overworld, under the watchful eye of the Horiki. And then once they were old enough to begin to be like self-sufficient, they would be brought back down and then taught how to worship the Horiki while they were up there, but then how to exist in the middle plane by the Horiki as well, so that they could continue to cultivate and then worship Theranik, worship Elios, worship Keteline, and worship Zaok as gods, respectively, with their own purposes.
Did they clean up the world, or was it still a mess from the wars?
So we'll gloss over that a little bit. I'll answer your question, but we'll gloss over it because we'll talk in depth. So the war that we're talking about is actually called the Fall, and then the follow-up war is the destruction of Savarion. And those two wars, there's a third one that follows as well called the Rebirth. So those three wars make up the Great Wars and the Third Age. The whole Third Age is those three wars. And we'll cover in depth each of those wars. But to answer your question as a blanket answer, yes, everybody ends up dying. The Horiki don't actually participate a whole lot in it because of a couple of events that allow the Comatai and the Immortuum to actually come out of the underworld into the natural world, and they actually do most of the damage, right? And then the Coriatii and the Horiki come back, and they don't kill the creatures of the underworld, but they put them back in their rightful place. Obviously, some of them will die. Some of them died in the process, but their goal was to put them back in their rightful place, not to kill them off. Okay, so once the world settles and all the races of the underworld are back in their place, the races of the overworld go back in their place, the sprites come down, rebuild the home cities of the 9 races, and then the 9 races are introduced back into the mortal world. And so we're talking 100 and some odd years before they're introduced back in.
So there's a gap of kind of unrecorded history of sorts, because there's no one to record it. Everyone's living in the overworld in peace and happiness and like da 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 da. Everything's so good.
Would they skip that time period, or would it just be a blip of
It's
emptiness?
kind of a blip of time. So we have Duendelvin, who is still there, who would still have to see these memories, but these memories would be pretty blank. Part of the magic that she endures is if events are pivotal, she'll see what led up to those events. So the magic kind of has a source of its own, like a will of its own, and it forces her to experience these things that are pivotal to history. And it kind of sometimes those events aren't well known until it's already passed, and then she gets forced back to review them again. And in this point in time, the people who were existing in the overworld, there wasn't really a pivotal moment in history. Like, everything was lollipops and rainbows. It's kind of boring.
Okay, so that would have been a pretty boring period of time for her, considering she has immortality, essentially.
Agelessness, yeah.
Agelessness, yeah. An inability to die. From age.
Well, there's still a lot of history to cover. We're talking like we're only in what 1589, 1600. She still has plenty of years to go back through and master this magic that's been forced upon her. Kind of. She volunteered for it, but at the same time, it was. I don't think anybody fully understood what was going to happen when they enacted this influence on her. So she volunteered to be an experiment, and
So it works or sort of didn't.
it definitely works. Just like that, like we could probably do a whole episode on Duendelvin alone. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
But
because
at this point, when the world plunges into the fall, she would have had those abilities for over 2,000 years. So she's mostly mastered them at the point in the timeline where the fall happens, that war kicks off. Duendelvin's mostly fully capable of being able to see the things that she can see. It doesn't really bother her anymore. She's like figured it out because she's had it for 2,000 years ish.
Okay.
So
With the Horiki, how would they want to have worship conducted towards them? And how would their god structure be? Like, how did they present themselves?
so this is kind of fun because there's not a lot of like history as far as how they first tried, because their first attempt failed. Eventually, it fails. Ayala, being a dirtbag, gets in the works and messes things up. Plus, there's records that were missed that lead to the actual understanding of what the Horiki were buried where the keepers existed. That eventually lead to the disillusionment of the people of the 9 races. But effectively, each of them still got worshipped as a god for their respective. What's what I'm looking for? Oh my goodness.
Directive?
No, because it's like they're not emotion. Because Deterrent is peace, so he's worshipped as the god of peace. Ilios is the god of order. Zayak is the god of order. Ketelin is the god of justice, and that's their structure. And so those are the major tenets that guided people. Would be these are the tenets that we live by, and this is how we treat each other. Is these different tenets?
So even though they figured out they weren't the gods, they still worshipped them as such?
Eventually, kind of things change. There's a really cool point after that's after rebirth, that happens.
Okay.
The Horiki become more successful in their second way through. Their second wave of there's a period of time called the affirmation, where they affirm in the minds of the people that either you accept us or we kill you.
So during this period where they're teaching the kids, right? So they're too young to really understand what's going on in the world. They grow up in these huge cities built by the sprites with the Horiki teaching them directly, face to face, I am your god, right? And so you think Theranik, Ilios, Ketelin, and Zayak are all like walking around, and then you have the rest of the Horiki walking around too. So we're talking legions of Horiki intermingling with the 9 races and demonstrating their power and teaching them the version of history that they want them to know as if they are the gods, right? The understanding that basically how this works is we're teaching you all, right? We created and are building you guys up from the ground up to learn and to know so that you can go into the world and live in the world in peace under our leadership, right? And so they're teaching the races all of this information from that perspective. Obviously, they're lying to them, but how would these kids know any different, right? And so when they're adults and there's a second generation ready to go, you know, you have your first generation, your second generation. They say, okay, we're ready to go. The sprites have rebuilt the home cities, except for Kungin, because it never actually became destroyed. Kungin's indestructible. They take the 9 races, they take all of them and put them back in the world. And they're like, okay, you guys know the truth. You guys have been taught from us. Go. And then, so that happens after the destruction. So there's this period of time between the destruction and the rebirth period of time where the 9 races exist and for the most part are fairly peaceful, and they worship the tenets of the gods as such.
And then how did the gods want to be worshipped?
As if they created the whole world. So there's no, as far as the 9 races are concerned at that point in time, there is no history before them. So they're the creationists, and all they wanted was, you know, pray to us, acknowledge us, but go about your daily lives. And if you need something, sure, we can help out. But for the most part, leave us alone, give us your praise. We have one holiday throughout the entire year that you give us all your attention. Other than that, don't screw up. Leave us be. We'll leave you be.
So like a multi-god Christian standpoint, or like more of a Greek?
Go pagan. Yeah, like Greek.
Okay. And then after, on their second attempt, do they switch things up, or?
In a different way. They they still stay as like their different tenets. So like if you were more of a follower of Order, like if you believed that Order was the more important tenet, then you as an individual would worship Zaok. Or if you were like, I'm all about mercy, then Elios would be the god that you would pay homage to. So you would have a shrine that you would worship at. Effectively, that was Elios. So they would have little individualized shrines, little different individual things that they would go to. And then there would be 4 major temples, one to each of them. And Thernix would always stand a little higher than the rest because even over all of that, justice was the major tenet.
So is Thernic like the older brother? He led everyone?
Yeah.
Well, because of when Nargoth died, Thernic became the new Nargoth. So he's the head. As far as when they were created, Nargoth would have created them at the same time, but there was a tendency for Thernic to kind of step into a more leadership role than the other 3. And so when Nargoth died, he stepped up. One of them had to, and Thernic was the logical choice.
And when Thernic achieved his essentially godhood, did he continue searching for a way to get the powers of his father? Or did he just completely abandon that?
No, that would have been not necessary anymore. The threat to his people was gone. His people were no longer quelling wars. They weren't being lost to foolish mortal behaviors. So he was very content, and we are gods now. We're safe now. His goal became, I am saving my people. And that's what it was. Because,
Okay.
yeah, they couldn't reproduce, but he didn't feel like that was necessary because their numbers were adequate to handle what was necessary, and they hadn't lost anybody at that point in time in a very long time.
Okay.
Right.
Were they part of any other significant wars? Did they start more of them?
So they never started another war, but they were in another war. So the Rebirth is the only war that they participated in as their actual race was part of the conflict, right? So they were involved as, peacekeepers and, all that kind of stuff for all these years. But during the Rebirth, after they put their races down, there was a few hundred years of peace, and Ayala decided that he was going to share the information from the Keepers of the Peace, from their scrolls, to the 9 races. He was just going to let the information loose of what the Horiki did and why they did it. And so at that period of time, the races kind of split to the people who were like, no, you're making that up. And then the people who said, maybe that is true, and started diving into it. And so a group of people followed Ayala and started fighting back. So the Horiki actually had to participate in a war because the 9 races went to war against the Horiki specifically, right? And so what happened was, because of Ayala's influence and his ability to manipulate the way people think, he brought forth another god who was in the age of creation, which is the first age, and then that god was imprisoned and then brought back for this fight. And so this fight, the 9 races are warring against the Horiki, the legions of Horiki. The Horiki get decimated, completely decimated. All of them except the 4 brothers. The 4 brothers are like, hey, how are we going to survive this? Right? And Zaok says, I know a way. The weapons that created us, that the Keepers of the Peace had that created us, if we can find those, we can win this war. And so the 4 of them disappear, right? And so this is happening while the legions of Horiki are being... It's not like they got decimated and then the 4 were like, oh no, we have to go do this, and disappeared for a while. It was in the midst of all of it that the 4 of them said, okay, we got to go find the weapons. They ended up finding the weapons just after all of the rest of the Horiki died. So only the 4 of them are left when they actually have the weapons. They use those weapons to banish this other god. Vagog is her name. So they banish her back and then completely decimate the armies of the 9 races. Wipe them out. In fact, so much so that the areas where that happened moving forward, not only did the world become a Pangea, was a Pangea, became continents, but the places where that happened became known as the last stand of whatever the city's name was. So we talked about the orc city, Kungan. So the last stand of Kungan actually is a location on the map after it breaks into continents because of the destruction that happened there.
Well, you said earlier you can't break Kungan.
No, but the armies were decimated there.
The armies
So
of
Kungan's
Kungan.
still there, but the armies are not.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so what happened was after they decimated the 9 races, just completely decimated them, there were still those who believed that the Horiki were gods. They gathered a council together and said, okay, we're sorry, you're the gods. We were at fault, our bad. And so Theranet comes back down and says, okay, under one condition, we will not completely wipe you out. Under one condition. We are unequivocally the only gods in your world. You will only ever worship us. And for an entire month, the very first month of every single year, for a whole month, you will celebrate us. You'll celebrate each of us 1 week at a time. In Savarion, the weeks or the months are broken into 4 equal weeks per month. Okay, so first four weeks of the year, we celebrate one of the gods. The whole month. That's all the month is dedicated to. People don't work. People don't play. People don't do anything other than worship us, and we'll call it good and let you go back to your way. Mm-hmm. And so they said yes. That ended the third age and starts the 4th age, and that's called the affirmation. Mm-hmm. And so from here on out, when we refer to affirmation, we're talking about that is the day of affirmation. So like how we say BC or AD in our world, right? That would be before affirmation, after affirmation, right? That's significant of an event.
I mean, it took the world from the Pangea it was and shattered it into its continents and effectively scattered the people and forced the first time a commingling of the races, which is a really cool concept that hadn't happened previously. Up until the affirmation, all the races pretty much stayed to themselves. They'd have interactions, trades, councils. Most of the time, the only time they got together was the Council of the 9, when all the races came together to meet, like the heads of the races came together to meet at effectively like a parlay with the keepers. That was pretty much the only mingling, unless they had neighbors that they would get involved with. That's why there was such a skirmish and such a conflict all the time, because the 9 they didn't understand, they didn't know, and since they didn't know, the unknown leads to fear leads to animosity. On top of that, there's also like, I covet what you have, I need what you have, all sorts of other things come into play, very petty things. But yeah, the isolation of the 9 races is honestly, I think, what contributed so much to the turmoil that they experienced without direct divine leadership.
Okay.
And so for the point of the affirmation, so the 4th age, the Horiki rule as gods for the entirety of the 4th age, which is almost 3,500 years.
It's a very long time.
So it is the longest period of relative peace that Savarion ever experiences in any age. And it is run by the Horiki, who claim to be the gods. It's the most peaceful time. So
we had a different kind of conflict, though. Different kind of struggles, because you had empires which is just so much fun to talk about, because this is honestly, we're working on the role-playing game, and that's where most of the role-playing game centers, because that's where most of the fun is, as far as being able to explore a world. It provides the most opportunity. And yeah, there's definitely conflict. There's also the Horiki, so kind of going back to them a little bit. Theranik never figures out the secret of how to make more Horiki. He just really he doesn't have the power or whatever. They even have the weapons, the god weapons, what they're called, and they try their hand at creation. So each of the brothers makes a herald, and it's the idea of a copy of a copy of a copy is super flawed. These heralds are terrifying monsters, but they're terrible. They're effectively dragons is the shape that they are given. And they are kept in a very short leash in the overworld because if unleashed, they do bad. They just are awful. And that was when Theranik was like, I don't think I can fix this. I don't think I can make more of us because look at what I made. This is not good.
Whoops.
Oh.
So, you gave a time frame. Does this time end? Like,
Which
who
time?
messes up the affirmation?
Man, we are jumping so far forward into time. I like this. There is an individual who, through Duendelvin's guidance and shenanigans, because Duendelvin had originally stayed out of it. Duendelvin had still existed, eventually escapes the overworld, and then decides, I'm tired of being a passive watcher, it's time to be a player.
I had a feeling Ayala would do it.
Ayala tried to mess with it. Ayala's sole purpose, so kind of Ayala's thing is he was an original. He was around when both the creator gods existed, and he studied under them at first. He was one of their high priests.
Oh.
He's been around for a very long time, like since the beginning.
Right. So by an original, he was created, not born.
Yep.
Ayala was created, not born.
Oh, wow.
So
Ayala has a lot of knowledge, a lot of history, and a lot of time to go insane. There was an event during the creation that instilled another god because there was an imbalance. Savarion is supposed to be a place of balance, and when this new god came in, it shattered Ayala's faith. Suddenly, he didn't think his gods were all powerful gods anymore, and he was like, "Who is this person?" And he was seduced by Vagog, and became the high priest of Vagog.
Is Vagog this new god?
Vagog was the new god that came into being. And she is the one that gifted him with the ability to go ageless. It was not a thing that was given to the mortals through the original gods. She taught him and held off the ravages of time, and that was his reward for becoming her high priest. So that's Ayala, his origins, in a very small nutshell.
But Ayala becomes the boogeyman. And so when Duendelvin steps in and says, I need to be part of things, she gathers a group together to kill off the Horiki, to go search for the weapons, kill off the Horiki. Ayala shapeshifts, and because Ayala has the ability to protect his mind from Duendelvin, she can't see into his mind, he steps into the group and pretends to be somebody that Duendelvin called into the group, right? So he goes and kills the one that Duendelvin called and then assumes his role
This
to
is not the
participate.
first time. Yeah, this is how he got into the Keepers as well. He was never called to be a Keeper. He assassinated the actual person who was called and inserted himself as that person within the Keepers.
I feel like we need a whole episode just on Ayala. But to bring it back to the Horiki.
Yeah.
So he participates in this. They go find the weapons. And then the goal was to destroy the Horiki with the weapons. Use the weapons, destroy the Horiki. Finally be rid of them. This player, Mikkel, decides that he's going to fuse dark magic into the light weapons. And it destroys the weapons and basically ground zeros a huge area of land. And the 4 Horiki were there. They died. The whole group, the party dies, right? Duendelvin's protector shields her long enough that she can teleport out of the zone, and her protector dies. And the weapons explode and create this barrier around the world that protects Savarion from external sources. So the gods can't get into Savarion at this point. That's what ends the 4th age. But that's the end of the Horiki for this part of the story.
Yep.
Was Ayala there? Or...
Ayala dies.
also
That's
got
when
back.
Ayala dies as well. So
Wow.
Ayala's gone.
So Mikkel took out every big player in the world of Savarion.
Duendelvin makes it.
Except Duendelvin.
Yep.
Yes.
So Duendelvin...
Duendelvin's the only surviving major player in the entire world when that happens, with one exception. But that one exception is back during the fall, and he gets his own story as well. He's one of the great leaders of the fall of Savarion.
And his fate is really, really unfortunate. Oh, man.
Super unfortunate.
I think we'll have to do that one after we talk about his race and what makes them who they are, to understand why his punishment is so fitting.
Yeah.
It's necessary.
So,
no.
for sure. So that would be the end of the Horiki as far as this part of the story is concerned. There is another introduction of the Horiki. They do get brought back an age later. So they get brought back in the 6th age.
Are they brought back, or their race brought back?
The brothers are brought
The
back.
5 of them are brought back.
And
Nargoth
and Nargoth, yep,
the 4
right
brothers
up.
are brought back in the 6th age. So the entire 5th age exists without them. So they exist in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th and 6th age. Yeah, that's how they are destroyed.
Yeah.
So
Well, no, because they're ending Ushers in the 4th age, right? Like, their destruction. So, I guess that they would have a brief flash
Fifth.
of existence.
5th.
The 5th age, you're right.
Yeah.
Because, the affirmation is the 4th age.
Is the start of the 4th
Yep.
age.
That's right.
So yeah.
So the Horiki were probably... They've had a long time to be dirtbags.
It doesn't sound like they are from the way you phrase it, because you said the world of Savarion was in the most peace it was for the longest period of time under their rule.
Peace through tyranny.
Peace through tyranny, okay.
So
Screw up, get wrecked.
in the same way that you would answer and follow somebody who would just kill you if you decided not to, that's why there was so much peace. Is because Theranik would be
okay.
like, oh, I'm going to send my dragon to wipe that group out because I don't like them. And they had that mentality during the 4th age of, well, if I mess up, I'm going to die. And so that first month where people just celebrated, that's all they did. Because, the 2nd, 3rd year, a couple people were like, whatever, we don't need to. And then Theranik killed him. Or Zayak was like, oh yeah? And then kills him. And so...
You'd hope it was, honestly, you'd hope it was Elios, because you'd have to be merciful.
Right.
Because that would be, otherwise you were going to be put on display, or Zayak was going to turn you into a puppet, or...
Oh,
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Kettling is justice also. His justice is, I will mete out to you the damage that you have done. So whatever the crime is will be fit the punishment.
So definitely not good.
No.
They created peace, but because they were feared so greatly.
Okay.
They tried to destroy agency, effectively. People had no room to explore other deital functioning, like other types of existence. They were bubbled into do this or else. There are whole cities wiped out by the dragons, the heralds, or whole armies mustered against certain areas. It depends on the dragon. Some these are not good beings. When left to their own
Sound
devices,
terrifying.
they're absolutely monstrous, and they're not well put together, like literally and figuratively. They are unhinged.
Were the heralds ever defeated, or when the gods blipped out of existence for an entire age, did they just go loose in the overworld?
No, they don't just go loose in the overworld. They go loose in the mortal realm. There's a whole section where the empires muster forces to try and slay the dragons. There'll be a whole series of stories that goes into how that happens, because each dragon effectively is a corrupted variant of the tenant they were supposed to uphold in a very unusual way.
So they wreak havoc and are subsequently destroyed during the 5th age,
Okay.
The Age of the Godless.
the age of the godless.
And then did they wreak havoc in the overworld as well?
They weren't strong enough to do that. You had the sprites and the Coriatii. They wouldn't hold a candle to those two.
Oh.
The Coriatii and the sprites would handily dismember. So, but the Coriatii don't care. The same thing if they had tried to go to the underworld and wreak havoc, the Immortuum would have eaten them for breakfast.
So they're powerful, but they're not that powerful.
Well, yeah, because that's the idea of the Xerox theory. It's like you've made a copy of a copy of a copy at this point in time. So you've had in this case, it's different only because it's creationists. That's not the right word. You have a creation that was created by a creation that was then created by a creation. So the quality continues to diminish and the power available continues to dissipate.
So like early AI.
A little bit, yeah. You can go that route. Early AI was pretty cool on stuff. Like, we won't go into that too much, but effectively the lack of body is what limited AI's development into understanding its environment.
Yeah.
Right.
You could roughly tell what it was trying to make, but it no way, shape, or form looked real.
Nope.
So with all that, the god structure, there's a hierarchy. And so I'm going to use, once the Horiki claim themselves gods, as the god structure. So you have your greater gods, which are the Dissactos, that is testing, Parvulcan and Veritas Sanctus, right? So Veritas Sanctus and Parvulcan are greater gods. And then Vagog is a result of what Parvulcan and Veritas Sanctus messed up. Vagog becomes a greater god because of that purpose. Now the Coriatii and the sprites are lesser gods of the overworld, and then the Comatai and the Mortuum are lesser gods of the underworld. And then the Horiki and Shimbare get titled as construct gods. So they're the next level down, right? And so the dragons would be lower tier construct gods than the Horiki and then Shimbare, but they would still be considered construct gods. And then you have mortals that earn enough authority and power to become demigods, right? So that's our god structure. So Ayala and Duendelvin are both demigods. They're not the only ones that ever earn that in the story, but they're the two major named players in the overarching story that earn demigodhood.
Ayala would be the very first one to earn demigodhood, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, considering that they did, like, at the very beginning of time.
A lot of time to study the mysteries of the world.
Right. So that's how the god structure works. So back to the dragons, would they have wreaked havoc in the overworld? Not a chance.
Nope.
Not a chance. Because the Coriatii are lesser gods.
Yep.
And the Immortuum are lesser gods. And the dragons are low tier construct gods, which is the tier below. And so even the Horiki couldn't even fight against the Coriatii.
They definitely negotiated with the Coriatii and say, hey, let the mortals mess up. Let things play out as they will. Just don't mess with this, and that'll make your job easier. So they knew, the Horiki knew instinctively that even the legions couldn't take on the Comatai or the Coriatii. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So
yeah, it's kind of wild in that regard. They had this very well understood that I'm gonna die if I fight you. Like, I could bring all my brothers and all my friends to bear against one of you, and I'm gonna get ripped to shreds like bacon. I don't know why bacon, but bacon sounds really good right now, and I may be hungry.
now that you're talking about it, I am
hungry.
also hungry.
That's something we can cover and have fun with. The different foods that are in Savarion that we've created.
We already got one food that's been talked about.
We have a couple of them.
Yeah.
The alcohol berry.
The alcohol berries. Oh, yeah. Oh. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to cover unless you got more questions.
Yeah, that's specifically geared at the Horiki.
Yeah.
There's a lot of story left, but...
Well, we went through a big, huge time. Is there anything we missed with the Horiki? Or was it just kind of same stuff?
Oh, we didn't talk about their actual function. So when the Horiki were operating as peace officers, right? Like, with the Keepers still. They would operate in 5-man cells. We kind of talked about it a little bit. But one of the cool parts about being from the overworld is you'd have the 4 brothers would be out and about, plus Nargoth, trying to handle things all the time, right? And if they needed support, they would legitimately have one of their strike teams, like an ODST team, come down. That was 5 Horiki who were each attuned to a specific type of essence magic that would straight up drop from the sky, bust out, and just go ham. Like, go to town, go ham, have a blast. And so you had that's how they operated, is in 5-man strike squads who got summoned to the area that they were in, and yeah, just had fun.
Okay, so they'd call if the four brothers and
And Nargoth.
Nargoth needed help, they'd call in basically a cleanup crew.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Or
we need some need some help. Yeah.
They would they work together well? Like, would you just throw them together, or was it like people that, or I guess, essence?
So essence is the magic. That's the magic that's everyone has the instinctual capability to utilize. And since these all were constructs created with this particular focus on that, so if I'm understanding the question right, I kind of jumped in. Each of them was given mastery over a particular type of essence. Martial skills. There's an essence magic. So you had one of the Horiki was a master of martial capabilities. That's unparalleled. And since they could take on different forms, you could have like some of them looking like 4 to 6 armed monsters, depending on what they needed to deploy. Then you had one who was a master of light magic to ensure that none of his brothers fell. You had one that was a master of dark magic to inflict and support his team. You had one who was a master of the skirmishing, which was, I'm going to take you out from all different kinds of ways from Sunday. Skirmishing is very adaptable, so they could get up and punch you in the face and then run away and shoot you in the back. Or like swap. I love swap.
Shade
swap.
away.
Shade away. Disappear on the battlefield and go target specific individuals. And so yeah, that's what those 5 did, and they worked.
And then the Elementalist.
The Elementalist who just came in and wrecked destruction and was able to tank it up and support his brothers and sisters.
So I'm thinking, how about for our next episode, we talk about the different forms of magic, where they come from and what they are. We can dive into the depths of the magic of this world. So,
all right.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for today.
Are we going live on our next episode?
Yes, we are.
We're going to go full on live. This is going to be unfiltered.
Unfiltered, uncut.
They're going to get that one first, correct?
Do what?
They're going to get the live one first before these two?
No,
we'll
these
post
two will
up
be available
as episode
before.
1 and 2, and then episode 3 will be live.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, barring something significant, I think we're going to try and do live for every single subsequent episode, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll be live moving forward. So every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, from 1 to 2, we will do the live episodes, and then we'll post the cut and edited and everything afterwards. But that's what we'll do.
We've also got a really cool showcase going on right now on our social medias, where they're doing showcases of the different heroes that are the forefront of the fall of Savarion that takes place with the board game. So that's something you can definitely check out on our social medias, and we'll have those posted up as well as far as what those are.
Yeah.
Link below.
Yep.
You'll be able to see all this shenanigans live and probably ask questions.
That would be really cool. We'd love to be able to take some questions during that time as well.
We're set up to do that if somebody wants to ask questions, so we can do that. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you on Tuesday.
On
See you
Tuesday.
Tuesday.